All right, take two. I know that Judy said that she was okay with listening to sassy whine, but truly 11 minutes of hearing her whine is way too much. So I caved and fed her again so that she will be quiet maybe for 10 minutes so we can talk. And what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about meeting deadlines. Didn't you just love Micah's post about deadlines and how important they are, and treating yourself like a professional, treating yourself like a professional writer? I assume that everyone who is in the room is looking to make this into a career. If you're not, that's entirely fine. Writing for pleasure, writing what we call a passion project, writing something that is only for your family, only for yourself, is entirely fine. Entirely fine. That's not the kind of writing that I'm talking about at the moment. What I'm talking about is whether or not you can make a living as a writer. And you can. But you need to treat yourself like a professional. You need to treat yourself pretty seriously, which means you're going to need to do things like guard your time and work in those spaces where you can make choices about what you're going to work on. I always go to the brain science of why things work the way they do. How could it be that you have been on the planet for as long as you've been on the planet, knowing that this is what you want to do? You want to be a professional writer. You want to have your stuff out in the world. You want to tell stories. Maybe you've been writing. Maybe you've got 20 trunk novels, and then probably you are the outlier, because mostly what we do is we dream about writing. We think about writing. We want to write. But other things creep in. Other things take our time. How is that possible when we want it so much? There's a biological basis. There is a biological basis for what you might think of as your lack of motivation, or, if you're unkind to yourself, laziness. So what's the biological basis? All organisms have this triad. I wrote notes so I would not mess this up, because I messed this up last time because I got excited. So the motivational triad is that all organisms seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. Seek pleasure. So pleasure is all about dopamine, right? You want dopamine. Your brain wants that hit of dopamine. And we're going to later talk about how we have supersaturated our dopamine receptors with modern life, and why that's dangerous for us, and why we are effectively killing ourselves with pleasure. Avoid pain. Now, depends what you call pain, right? So is there something about the way you approach work that identifies it as pain? Because if you do, if it's painful for you, you'll avoid it. That could actually go to things like ergonomics. It could go to how you treat your workspace, when you work, whether or not you've had enough sleep. Oh, lovely, lovely sleep. Wouldn't we love some sleep? But you need to make sure that your work environment and your headspace when you go to work isn't in some way painful, because you will try to avoid it. At the biological level, you will try to avoid it in order to survive. The other thing that the brain does is look for ways to conserve energy. That's why we mostly see memories. The brain doesn't actually see reality. What it does is, when you go somewhere new, it creates a picture. And each time you go there, it pulls up bits of that picture from your memory. And if there's something new, it fills that in. This is why we notice new things, because mostly we're going from memory, because that uses less energy. Your brain is always looking to use less energy in case there is some moment when you must have energy. The lion, my famous lion, is charging across the savannah for you. So you might have avoidance techniques that are about your brain trying to keep you alive, trying to keep you, the organism, alive. So what do we do about that? What do we do about the fact that we are genetically predisposed to conserve energy, work on memory rather than being in present, and not meet deadlines because they don't feel pleasurable, they might feel painful, and they require energy of us. One of the big things that I see with lots of the psychologists and motivational speakers who talk about this is to set aside time in the morning. And I say this with, I always think about things in terms of spectrums. So for the majority, your brain is going to be most rested and most able to take on a big thing in the morning. So the morning is when you should set your priorities before you've done anything else, is to set your priorities. And lots of people have talked about priority setting. So I'm not an expert in any way on priority setting, but if you want to be a professional writer, you need to make this in the top 3 things you do every single day. It has to be your choice every day. Let's amend that. Let's say every working day, because I know some of you take a day of rest. But you need to choose it, and you need to choose it over other things that could take your time. So sit down, write a list of how you spend your time, maybe just for a week. Write down how you spend your time, and then go through and make decisions about whether or not that's where you want to spend your time. Do you want to watch a 3rd episode of whatever you're watching on Netflix? Do you want to spend time on Instagram or Pinterest or Facebook or wherever you go? Do you want to spend your time on the new chat rooms, wherever they are? I forget what the name of the new place is. Oh, we're coming up in 7 minutes. Good. And when you've done that, and you have cut out some of those things that are not focused on your goal is to be a published professional writer, see whether or not you can't reward yourself by giving yourself back that time. Give yourself the time that you've been giving away. I do watch a lot of TV, British TV, because I live in exile and I want to go back to England. Think about what that activity that you're doing is serving. I sell it to myself as I'm doing research. And sometimes I am. I'm almost always watching for story, but also I'm using it a little bit to numb out. I'm so sorry. And why would we do that? Why would we try to numb ourselves out with television, with food, with sugar, salt, alcohol? All these things are numbing us out because the brain seeks, the pleasure centers of the brain seek a dopamine hit. And you know all of these studies, you know them. I study the mouse is put in a cage, and we don't let Ginger watch this. She hates these examples. And they have got 2 buttons. One is food and the other is heroin or cocaine. And the heroin or cocaine hit to the brain is like dopamine. And we will always seek that. We will seek that over sex. We will seek it over food. We will seek it over taking care of our relationships. We will seek it over pretty much everything else, because the brain is a pleasure-seeking organ. Your brain seeks pleasure for the propagation of the species, because we are always trying to survive as a species. The organism is trying to survive. So it will seek pleasure. Pleasure being food, sex, those kinds of things that keep the organism alive and keep the species reproducing. Not at the very basis level, but in the big picture level. This is what your brain has been designed for over eons of time. So you will seek pleasure. And what's the problem with seeking pleasure? We're supposed to, right? The problem is habituation. So you become habituated to the stimulus that you give yourself. And a very easy example is if you go into someone's house around Christmas, if they celebrate Christmas, and you can smell the tree for the first 15 minutes, and then you don't smell it anymore because your brain has habituated. It goes into, okay, I understand. That's my normal now. I don't have to pay attention to it. Similarly, the cicadas, which are out, hooray, cicadas! For the first few days I was in Japan, I thought they are deafening. Within a week, I couldn't hear them because the brain normalizes your normal and becomes habituated. It also becomes habituated to these dopamine hits. This is why we are an addictive species. It's not a weakness. It's an actual programming part of how we survive that we've just happened by the way that we live, modern society, the way that we live. We will seek to abuse the dopamine hit, and we will use whatever gives us that hit more and more and more because the brain becomes habituated to it. So you can never get that first high. You can never, they call it chasing the high. But one of the reasons that you might be doing things on your list that aren't oriented around your goal and aren't serving your greater purpose is because you are seeking a dopamine hit for a high that is elusive. And I mean this very, very lovingly. So you might be doing things that do not serve you because of your brain. So you are perhaps trying to conserve energy, so that will lead you to not do the thing. You are perhaps trying to avoid pain, to work out what brings you pain, and you are perhaps seeking a certain kind of pleasure that actually is a pleasure trap. It's called the pleasure trap. Pleasure and contentment are different things, and reaching your goal requires that you don't go into this state of hyperstimulation where you become habituated to whatever your dopamine hit is and have to do it again and again and again and again and again because you can't feel it anymore. So you actually need to do a kind of a temporal cleanse. If you were doing it actually for an addiction or you were doing it for food, you would fast for a day. You would have a water fast or a juice fast. And actually what that's doing is it is taking you out of that state of hyperstimulation and getting your taste buds back to being able to taste so that you are not numbed away or habituated to this hyperstimulation that you've got going on. So when you've looked at your list of how you spend your time, think about doing a temporal fast. Think about not doing those things that give you the dopamine hit and see whether or not you can get yourself back into that band of being stimulated by your environment but not being hyperstimulated so that you can actually work on goals which are long-term rather than meeting pleasure, which is different. Are you with me? This is part one. Shoot me questions. I've gone way over time, but I wanted to talk to you about why you might not have done it so far and start talking about how you can do it going forward. All right, part one.